There is a particular kind of frustration that comes from watching someone else become publicly associated with something you have been doing quietly for years. Sometimes it is an idea, a method, a creative approach. At others, it is a way of speaking, teaching, leading, solving problems, or seeing the world. You know that the work did not begin when other people noticed it because you remember the earlier iterations. You remember studying, testing, failing, refining, and returning to the work when no one was paying attention. However, when recognition does not arrive alongside the work, something strange begins to happen. You may start questioning whether the work even matters at all. You may begin treating public acknowledgement as though it were the final piece of evidence required to make your contribution real. And without even realizing it, you begin to outsource your own authority. That is what I want us to examine today. In the two previous point of view conversations, we discussed the gentrification of beauty and the disclaimers women place before their own actual defense. We have considered the difference between contribution and recognition, as well as the emotional cost of claiming work that has not yet been publicly validated. However, insight alone is not enough. We can become very skilled, and actually we have at this time, we've become very skilled at recognizing cultural patterns while remaining unable to actually see where those patterns are actually governing our own lives, okay? We can agree that follower count is not the same as expertise, and then dismiss our own work simply because we think that we haven't amassed enough followers. We can understand that recognition often arrives later while still assuming that the absence of recognition means that we are somehow unqualified. We can defend someone else's contribution while refusing to actually name our own. This episode is therefore not another essay. It is really a practice. I am calling it the Legitimacy Audit. Its purpose is not to manufacture confidence or to persuade you to actually claim expertise that you have not yet earned. No, its purpose is really to help you to identify where something has already been earned but has not yet been fully claimed. There is an important difference between pretending to have authority and refusing to actually acknowledge the authority your work has already developed, okay? The first is inflation. The second is self-erasure. And visibility culture makes that distinction quite difficult to hold because we are surrounded by numbers and symbols that appear to tell us who matters. We see the verification checks, the follower counts, the views, the subscriber totals, bestseller labels, revenue screenshots, press mentions. We see them on the stages. We see testimonials. We see brand partnerships, credentials, and proximity to recognizable people. None of these things are inherently meaningless. No. Recognition can be useful. Social proof can help people make decisions. Numbers can demonstrate reach, demand, and resonance. However, numbers cannot tell the full story of a body of work. They cannot tell us how long someone has been studying. They cannot measure the hours spent developing a point of view. They cannot show how often a process was tested before it was named. They cannot tell us who was doing the work before an algorithm made it even, the subject matter of the month, okay? Visibility tells us who can currently be seen. Legitimacy asks, what has actually been built? I want you to think of one area in your work and in your life which you have been waiting for external permission to acknowledge what is already there. The area may be professional. You may have developed a process in your business that consistently produces results, but because you do not have a particular certification or a large audience, you describe the process as though you merely stumbled upon it, right? The area may be creative. You may have been writing, designing, photographing or cooking, styling, or making music for years, yet you continue to describe yourself as someone who is trying to break into the industry, right? The area may be personal, right? People may have relied upon your discernment, your leadership, care, or wisdom for a really long time, but you were still waiting for, just a little something, right? In order to name the capacity that you already carry. I want you to choose an area and remain with it throughout this audit. The first question is this: what existed before the recognition? What were you already doing before anyone praised it, paid for it, shared it, invited you for it, or gave an official name for it? Your answer should be specific. Consider what you actually did. Perhaps you spent years researching a subject. Perhaps you solved the same kind of problem repeatedly. People have begun coming to you for a particular form of support, right? Whatever it may be, you may have developed language that helped others understand something more clearly, right? You may have noticed patterns that others have overlooked or created a process because the available options weren't actually working for you. Okay, I want you to think of that and ask yourself what existed before the applause. This is the first part of the audit because legitimacy often begins in private. It develops through repetition, study, experimentation, correction, and the willingness to return to the work long before the work becomes impressive to other people. The second question is, what evidence have I been disqualifying because it did not arrive in the form I expected? Sometimes, we claim that we have no proof when what we really mean is that we don't have prestigious proof. You may not have secured a large contract, but your process may already have worked for several other people. You may not have the formal title, but you've been carrying the responsibility for years. You may not have thousands of readers, but the readers you do have may regularly tell you that your work gave them language to something that they could not previously explain. You may not have been cited publicly, right? But you may be able to actually trace the development of your ideas through years of notebooks, conversations, client work, recordings, projects, or drafts. Consider the evidence you have dismissed because it did not appear glamorous enough. We are often more willing to recognize legitimacy once it becomes legible to the marketplace, right? But the thing is that value can exist before it becomes marketable. Mastery can exist before it becomes popular, and contribution can exist before someone else decides to clock it. The third question: whose recognition have I made necessary? Now, this question may be uncomfortable. I know that it was for me because many of us have unconsciously selected a particular person or group of people, an institution, audience, client, or industry to serve as the final authority on whether our work actually counts. So you may actually believe that you will feel legitimate once established names begin sharing your work, once a particular publication calls, once your audience grows, once you earn a specific credential or once someone you admire welcomes you into the room. Now, let me be clear. There is absolutely nothing wrong with wanting recognition. The problem begins when we expect recognition to actually create something that it can only reveal. Recognition can introduce your work to more people, yes. It can expand access and generate opportunity and amplify what you have built. That is facts. However, recognition cannot reach backward through time and make your years of labor suddenly feel real and like it matters. And the work was either being done or it wasn't. Your contribution was either developing or it wasn't. Recognition may confirm, reward, or amplify your work, but it does not create the history that preceded it. The fourth question is, where am I still using beginner language for work that has matured? I want you to pay attention to the way that you actually describe what you do. You may say some iteration of, I am kind of interested in this, or I have been playing around with this, or, I am trying to start, or, I'm not much of an expert, but some of the language may be accurate. There is freedom in being a beginner, and we do not need to actually race toward authority in every area of our lives. However, beginner language can also become a hiding place. It can allow us to remain unaccountable to the level of work we have actually produced. Once you acknowledge that something has matured, you may have to treat it differently. You may need to price it differently, present it differently, protect it in a different way, or actually commit to it differently. You may actually have to stop waiting for someone else to discover you and begin behaving like the steward of something that is valuable. So, ask yourself whether your work is truly still new or whether you have become accustomed to calling it new because claiming maturity feels like exposure. The fifth question is, what do I know now that I had to earn? This question is not asking you what you've heard, what you saw reposted, or what you repeated by someone else, right? It is actually asking you what you know based on your work. So I want you to consider the distinctions that you can make now that you could not have made several years ago. Think about the mistakes that you can actually recognize quickly simply because you have made them yourself. Perhaps you now ask questions that change the direction of a conversation simply because you've been there, right? Perhaps part of your process looks simple only because you have practiced it so often. We tend to underestimate embodied knowledge because it no longer feels like it's difficult for us. However, ease does not necessarily mean the work lacks value. Sometimes ease is evidence that the knowledge has become integrated. Now, the final question is this: what would change if I stopped waiting to be chosen as the face of this work and began acting as its steward? I am not asking you what would happen if you became louder than everyone else. We actually have enough of that, okay? Or that you've claimed to have invented every idea that has ever passed through your mind. No. Stewardship is really not egoic ownership. Stewardship is about responsibility. If a genuine body of work has developed through you, what does that work require from you now? It may require documentation, a name, a clearer point of view, or more visible public body of work, okay? A stronger boundary around it, okay? It may require your willingness to say, this is the perspective that I have developed. without you immediately feeling the need to diminish the statement. Perhaps the next stage of your work does not require more permission, but perhaps it is requiring your full participation. These are the central questions of the legitimacy audit. What existed before recognition? What evidence have you been disqualifying? Whose approval have you made necessary? Where are you using beginner language for mature work? What do you know because you earned that knowing? And what does responsible stewardship require from you now? To access the entire audit, you can actually scan the QR on the screen or click the link in the show notes. I would like to encourage you to pause this episode if necessary and really write through each question. The process may take, give or take, 15 minutes, right? But the amount of time really is, it doesn't really matter. It's really about your willingness to answer honestly. After you have completed the audit, I want you to take one action. I want you to identify one area where your work predates your recognition, and I want you to claim it out loud. You do not need to add a disclaimer or, exaggerate your accomplishments or pretend that you have nothing left to learn, right? You simply need to tell the truth. You might say, okay, you know what? I've been studying this for 6 years and I have developed X as my clear point of view. You might say, you know what? I created this process through repeated work with my clients. You may need to acknowledge, I have been doing this longer than my current audience actually reflects. You may even need to say, okay, you know what? My contribution is real, even though the recognition is still catching up to me, right? You can begin by saying it privately. You can write it in your journal, record it in a voice note, or share it with someone that you trust. Then consider what it would look like to place that claim somewhere that it can actually be seen. The action is not merely to believe that your work counts. The action is to stop describing your work as though it doesn't. Legitimacy is not conferred by recognition. Recognition often reveals what was already there. And your responsibility is not to force the entire world to agree with you today. Your responsibility is to stop joining the world and overlooking your own contribution. This episode is brought to you by On the Line Magazine, a conversation for women who want more and are willing to become more. Until next time, your practice this week is to find the work that existed before the recognition and claim it out loud.